DC at We Act Radio. Do something, please.
Hey, Washington, D.C., this is Kristen Rao-Finkbeiner, host of Moms Rising Radio, which airs every Saturday from 3 to 4 p.m. right here on 1480 AM We Act Radio. Each week, we bring you the current news and the inside scoop from policymakers, experts, advocates, moms, and dads on the most important issues that impact us all. So join our conversation every Saturday at 3 p.m. right here on 1480 AM We Act Radio.
You're listening to WPWC We Act Radio, 1480 AM, weactradio.com.
My name's Mark Levine, and I've got the inside scoop. Every Sunday from noon to 3 p.m. right here on We Act Radio, 1480 AM, I give you the inside scoop on what's going on in Washington. How do I know? Because I worked here. I worked in Congress. I helped to pass legislation. I helped to stop the right wing from passing a lot of really terrible legislation. And I'm proud to say that I go on air not only every Sunday noon to 3 p.m., but I take on the right wingers. I go on Sean Hannity's show, and he says I give him a headache. So check out the inside scoop, Sundays noon to 3 p.m. right here on We Act Radio.
Take Action News with David Schuster, Saturdays from 12 to 3 on We Act Radio, 1480 AM and weactradio.com.
Well, for me, it's always been, you report the facts. You report like hell, let the chips fall where they may. And the truth ultimately is what's going to sort of help our society and help all of us. I don't think progressives want a thumb on the scale on the facts. They just want the facts out there. You let the facts out, and progressives will tell you, we're going to win 70% of the time. You may quibble with the percentages or whatnot, but I think that's just sort of what progressives are looking for, and I think that's where this all sort of meshes with my interest as a journalist. And my interest as a journalist is report the facts. Here's what's going on. Here's what the facts say. Here's what history says. Here are the lessons we know we have learned. And let people draw their own conclusions. And I think what's so unfortunate right now in the world of broadcast media is I do think that a lot of conservative radio, certainly conservative television, they're not interested in facts. And that's ultimately where I think conservative media is going to have its downfalls, that Americans are hungry. They're just hungry for basic information, hungry for basic facts. You report like hell. You let the chips fall where they may. I think it's natural for all of us who care, who are passionate about politics, who feel like we have a sense about the difference between right and wrong. I think it's okay to let that be part of your coverage. It's important for all of us as broadcasters and journalists. In this day and age, we have to be authentic. You can't be the person who's up in the ivory tower that comes down and tells people, now you must eat your peas. No, it's all about, we all have personalities, and I think it's being aware sometimes of our own bias, but also being open to the idea that sometimes we're wrong, but we have a dialogue, and we have a passionate dialogue, and we care about this country, we care about this community, and I think that sort of passion is what carries us through.
Hear more from David Schuster, Saturdays from 12 to 3 on Take Action News on We Act Radio, 1480 AM and weactradio.com.
This is your boy, Richard Fowler. Catch my show every Friday nights from 8 to 10 on We Act Radio, 1480 or weactradio.com.
To We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
They were saying when they think you cannot hear. If you understood what they do, if for you it was so clear. If you knew they shut down the factory in an economic ruse. If you could kiss the cheek of the child in the sweatshop that made your shoes. Every time we went to war to fight our evil foes, they told you we were really fighting for the good of CEOs. If you could feel the hunger of the many, see the riches of the few. If they told it like it is, what if you knew?
Good morning. You're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers.
And Kevin Zeese.
And we have just a little bit of news. We have a great show lined up today.
What the frack is going on?
What the frack is going on?
We're going to talk about the myths of fracking and the benefits and costs, and it doesn't make sense. We have two great guests we'll talk about later.
Absolutely. But first, we went to an interesting party the other evening in Washington, D.C. It was a send-off party for John Kiriakou.
John Kiriakou is the only person to go to jail. He'll be going to jail this Thursday in relation to the torture program, and he didn't torture anybody. He blew the whistle on torture.
He exposed the U.S. torture program.
He's going to jail for 3 years.
Right.
30 months.
But some good news, I guess. Last night at the Oscar awards,
didn't grant the torture movie any awards.
Absolutely right.
Because Michelle Obama, for some reason, announced the top award, which is an unusual thing.
I guess our mirage politics is now just kind of miraging itself into the whole entertainment industry. Who knows?
Or something. This also was the weekend that Bradley Manning spent 1,000 days in jail.
That's right.
Waiting for a trial. And today the hearings start. We'll find out whether or not the military judge will grant his speedy trial motion, dismiss the case for violation of the speedy trial rules. We'll find out
1,000 days. That's not very speedy.
For a trial.
But let's go ahead and get into this topic because there's so much to talk about. There's a lot of misinformation out there and fog that we need to clear up, and we have just the people to do it. And we're going to start with our first guest is Dr. Tony Ingraffea. He's the Dwight C. Baum Professor of Engineering and Weiss Presidential Teaching Fellow, at Cornell University, where he has been since 1977. Dr. Ingraffea's research concentrates on computer simulation and physical testing of complex fracturing processes. He's also director of the Cornell Fracture Group. He has an extensive biography, which we will include on our website, clearingthefogradio.org. Good morning, Dr. Ingraffea.
Good morning, Margaret. Good morning, Kevin.
Thanks for joining us. We learned a lot just preparing for this show, listening to what you had to say. So thank you for being out there and getting the truth out in a clear way.
Absolutely. So first, if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about, first, let's bust a big myth.
Yeah, so we've had natural gas for a long time in this country. We've been drilling natural gas.
With fracking
since 1947. What's the big deal? Why is this different?
It's different because of the scale of getting gas or oil out of shale. Each of the wells, to be productive, must be much larger than the old wells. The many millions of gas and oil wells have been drilled around the world since the 1800s. Takes upwards of 5 to 10 million gallons of frac fluid to make a shale gas or shale oil well productive. That's 2 orders of magnitude larger in terms of fracking fluid and waste produced from each well. That's only part of the big picture. The other big picture is that you need a hell of a lot of wells.
Yeah.
The only way to make an effective production out of a shale gas or shale oil play is to drill wells everywhere. So you multiply a large number of wells by large wells, and you get really big numbers in terms of surface activity, industrial activity, landscape activity, chemicals used, and waste produced.
Well, and you made a distinction. We have been fracking since 1947, but you called that what we used to do conventional fracking, and you've called what we do now unconventional fracking. Can you explain? And that you've talked about in your previous talks that unconventional fracking has not only not been going on for very long, but it's still kind of evolving. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. The word unconventional refers to the fact in this case that shale is really impermeable. Very simply put, it doesn't want to give up its oil or gas very easily. Conventional fracking occurs in rock types that are very permeable, shale, limestone, sandstones. So you don't need very large fracks. You don't need a large number of cracks generated by human activity. You don't need a lot of fracking fluid. So that the change that's happened in the last decade or so is that companies are now going after the most difficult place to get oil or gas out of, and that's shale. Even though there's a lot of it there, it takes tremendous amounts of industrial activity and effort to get it out. So it's an extreme form of hydrocarbon production. It's getting into the very last vestiges of what the fossil fuel industry is trying to do to get the last barrel of oil and the last cubic foot of gas out of the earth.
It seems like so typical. We got the tar sands, you got the offshore oil, deep water drilling, the mountaintop removal.
Right.
It's all getting more and more dangerous every step of the way. You mentioned fracking fluid. Is that something you can drink?
Jokingly, a couple of industry executives, and even a governor, has recently drunk a form of fracking fluid. Obviously, anybody can claim that they're adding only household chemicals into water and claiming it's fracking fluid, but it's certainly not the kind of fracking fluid that's been used in 99.999% of all the frack jobs in shale and oil in the last 10 years. And drinking what goes down, of course, is disguises the real problem, which is drinking what comes back up. I dare any governor or any industry exec to go to any arbitrary shale gas or shale oil well being drilled today and fracked today and drink what comes back up. That's a public dare. I want to see that on TV.
We'll highlight that. We write about these interviews on Truth Out next Wednesday. We'll have an article about this. So we'll put that dare out there to encourage
Absolutely.
it.
I mean, we understood that just a few weeks ago on Valentine's Day there was an gas well explosion in Colorado that spewed 84,000 gallons of this fracking fluid back up, and it sounded like they had to clear the area. It doesn't sound like that was something that
that was
you
unplanned.
could drink.
Yeah.
That was unplanned. Thank goodness.
So that exposes another problem with what I refer to as intense development. This is an extreme form of energy development where you need a lot of wells per unit of area, and each well is large in terms of the length of the well, the industrial activity, the power necessary to drill the well and frack the well, and the amount of fluid needed to frack the well and the waste produced. And the more opportunity you have for things to go wrong, the more likely it is things go wrong, despite the industry claims that they're constantly improving the technology. I mean, they've had an opportunity now to drill over 25,000 shale gas and probably another 10, 12,000 shale oil wells. How much more opportunity do they want to perfect things?
Well, you describe these sites, which I think is important. Give us a kind of a vision of what that looks like.
On the radio, without waving my hands.
That's the challenge. That's your dare.
I'll compare and contrast. There are 40-some thousand oil and gas wells that have been drilled in my home state of New York since the 1820s.
Okay.
Quite typically, that process began with a bulldozer going out and clearing about a 1-acre area, and then a well is drilled with a small-scale derrick, what people associate with a drilled derrick from watching John Wayne in the movies. And then a frack truck comes out and injects something like with a pump, a couple hundred horsepower pump, something like 80,000 gallons of frack fluid to create what I would call a small-scale frack. Compare and contrast that to the latest and greatest state-of-the-art frack jobs that are occurring in places like the northern part of the southern peninsula of Michigan, the northeastern corner of British Columbia, and in some places in Texas, Arkansas, and Pennsylvania, where the bulldozer comes in and clears a 10 to 20 acre site.
Wow. 10 to 20
and 2 stages of drilling going on with 2 different kinds of drill rigs in order to get the well 5 to 10,000 feet down and another 10,000 feet laterally. So, and then when the drilling is done, the fracking rig comes in, or the fracking rig, and now we're talking 10 to 12 1,000 horsepower diesel-driven pumps, 100 truckloads full of water and chemicals, another dozen truckloads of, or train car loads of sand or proppant. And that activity occurs not just for one well, but state-of-the-art means that you're going to drill many wells from each of these sites.
So in that 10 to 20 acre site, there'll be many wells.
There'll be many wells. And by many, I mean 8, 10, 12, 16, 20 wells. And each of those wells now is requiring millions of gallons of frack fluid and tens of thousands gallons of chemicals, and they produce millions of gallons of waste. So you're talking about a very large-scale industrial activity occurring not over a week or two, but over a year or two to get all those wells drilled and fracked.
Wow. And so what is done with that waste then when that fluid comes back up?
Well, you got 3 kinds of waste: solid, liquid, and gas. The solids are the drill cuttings from drilling that 3 or 4 mile long hole in the ground. And those cuttings, of course, can be contaminated with whatever is in the rock that's been safely stored down there for a couple 100 million years. So that means heavy metals, in some cases naturally occurring radioactive material. So that solid waste has to be disposed of someplace, typically in a landfill or by what's called land spreading in regions, localities, states where those are permitted activities. Of course, one of the problems is we don't have federal regulations governing any of this, so each state has its own set of rules. Then you have the liquid wastes. These are the remnants of the drilling muds, which can contain chemicals that are harmful to the environment and human health. And those have to be safely captured, stored, transported, and disposed of. and there are only a few ways one can do that are legal. And then you have a much larger quantity of what's called frac fluid waste or flowback waste. This is the millions of gallons of stuff that is now contaminated with what's been stored underground for a couple 100 million years, plus whatever went into it in the form of fracking chemicals.
Where are they going to store all? You hear about the waste problem with nuclear, but this is a gigantic waste problem.
And it's getting larger because as the industry intends to drill another 25,000 shale gas and shale oil wells each year for the foreseeable future.
Wow.
Large numbers times large numbers times large numbers gives you really large numbers. There are only a few ways that you can legally take care of this waste. You've heard recently of problems with waste isolation wells, injection of waste from shale gas and shale oil wells, triggering human-induced earthquakes. So that's a problem. We're running out of storage space in what was traditionally the go-to place to store the waste, which is pump it down underground and hope that it stays there.
Right. We have to take a quick break,
Wow,
but then
what a
we'd like to
vision,
come
though.
back and
What
keep
a
talking
vision.
about this. And we're going into this break with a song by Lori Lou.
The land, I seek the taste of hope. There is a darkness in the land, I seek the taste of hope.
You're listening to WPWC We Act Radio, 1480 AM, weactradio.com.
My name is Jameer Balak, and I'm a student at Ballou Senior High School.
My name is Wallace Bright, and I'm a student at Ballou Senior High School.
My name is Victoria Hopper, and I'm a student at Ballou Senior High School.
My name is James Hill, and I'm a student at Ballou Senior High School.
We've been talking with our peers across the District of Columbia, and we discovered that a lot of them are talking about how they believe that we are not being provided the high-quality education that we know we need and quite frankly deserve.
They are talking about students in other jurisdictions who are, for the most part, learning and being supported in modern facilities and have access to 21st century technology.
We're hearing them say that there are actually 3 public school systems in the district: DCPS West, DCPS East of the River, and public charter schools.
They are saying things like we have been subjected to too many experimental models, unproven educational fads, and countless changes in philosophy and direction.
Some students are talking about how they feel that some of those in charge of our education system talk the good talk about reform and use all the other buzzwords, but at the end of the day, don't really give a damn about academic achievement for all.
Worst of all, everyone is talking about how we don't even have any voice in the public discourse around the direction of our education system.
Until now, because we all listen and share our views on the Education Town Hall, we are thankful that the host Thomas Bird believes that we should have access as well as a megaphone to talk back to the powers that be in the district and in halls of Congress. Join Thomas Bird every Thursday at 11 a.m. for the Education Town Hall, 1480 a.m. Listen live online at weactradio.com.
Hi, this is Chris Hedges, and when I'm in Washington, I don't want my news filtered through corporate sponsors. I want to hear the truth, which is why I listen to DC's only independent radio station, We Act Radio, 1480 AM, WPWC, Washington's progressive working community. We Act Radio, do something.
There is a darkness in the land with more sorrow than we can stand. But I say,
Speaking Truth to Expose the Forces of Greed with Margaret Flowers.
Kevin Zeese.
And our current guest is Dr. Tony Ingraffea.
Yeah, in the first segment we talked about, what fracking sites look like, and it's quite a massive industrial site, 10 to 20 acres with a dozen or more wells on it, massive drilling down and then laterally and causing all sorts of waste issues. We've talked about water and solids. We didn't talk about gases yet, and I wanted to hear what your thoughts are on that and put that in context of the impact of the gases that are leaked on climate change.
Sure. Everybody knows that natural gas is a fossil fuel, like coal and like oil, you burn it, you produce carbon dioxide. And we've heard a lot of talk recently across all elements of the political spectrum that natural gas is a clean fossil fuel. That's true if and only if you only compare the carbon dioxide that's produced when you burn it. The problem arises when one realizes that natural gas is methane, and methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide by a factor of anywhere from 30 to 100, depending upon how long you're willing to wait to make the measurement. That means that a very small amount of leakage of methane, anywhere from the time they drill a well to the time that methane gets to your home to be used to boil your eggs in the morning, any leakage of that methane into the atmosphere has a very important impact on climate change. So only recently, like in the last 2 years, has anybody even asked the question, how much methane is leaking? And is there more methane leaking from shale gas and shale oil production than was leaking from smaller scale activities like conventional oil and gas wells? So papers are being written as we speak right now, and the answers are starting to come out, and it turns out that so far, all the measurements that have been made indicate that a lot more leakage of methane is occurring than anybody ever imagined. So we're, on the one hand, we'd like to be told and listen. We'd like to believe what we're being told. That producing more natural gas from shale is a bridge to the renewable future. The problem is it's making the bridge longer because we're accelerating climate change. We're not decelerating it. We're not improving the situation. We're making it worse because we're putting not only carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but methane.
And you're talking about 20,000 wells a year being drilled, and
in the U.S. alone.
In the U.S. alone, wow, and that's right. This is a worldwide climate.
Yeah, the atmosphere belongs to everybody.
That's exactly right. And then you're talking about hundreds of thousands of wells planned for the future in the United States.
Correct.
So this methane leakage really could be a climate bomb even bigger than the tar sands that we're worried about from Canada.
I believe it is, and I believe it goes right to the heart of the myth of improving climate change, and it goes right to the issue of what I call generational greed. So the industry, in my opinion, makes things up as they go along. They wanted to produce a lot of gas from shale because everybody wants to get into the act and make a lot of money on it when gas was really expensive, natural gas, 3 years ago, $12, $13 a thousand cubic feet.
Wow.
Well, so now you had 70 or 80 operators across the U.S. producing as much new gas as they possibly could from shale, and they drove the price down. So that now they're not making any money. So now they make it up as they go along and say, energy independence and energy security.
Where does the money come for these massive industrial projects? They got to be very expensive.
Sure, except for the very large operators. Companies have to do what any other company has to do to create a product or a service. They go to Wall Street and they borrow. So investment bankers take a look and see what the estimated rate of return on the investment is, and they loan the money. Right now, nobody's loaning any money for just producing methane because you can't make any money at it. But let me return to the issue of energy independence, the myth of energy independence, and the other myth of energy security. Across the political spectrum, we're being told we have a 100-year supply of natural gas. Well, we don't. And we certainly won't have a 100-year supply if we start exporting it. Well, why would we want to export it? Because they can't make any money at $3 a thousand in the U.S., but they can make a lot of money at $14 or $18 a thousand in China, in Korea, or in Europe.
Wow.
So this is a myth of natural gas is not going to make us energy independent. It's just going to do what investment bankers want corporations to do, which is to get the highest rate of return for their investment.
We need to expand what across the political spectrum means, because when you limit it to the Democrats and Republicans, you're talking about two Wall Street parties that will both participate in this Wall Street farce.
Right.
So we got to somehow. That's a big problem, I think, in our political economy, is in our political democracy, is the limits we have with these two corporate parties that both.
And
support.
It goes farther with the energy security issue, which is a different argument. We want to have a secure form of energy. So here's a statement I would like anybody to refute. There is no more secure form of energy for any country on earth than energy it doesn't have to fight for. And what forms of energy do we not have to fight for? Forms of energy we already own. What energy do we already own and we don't have to fight for? Sunlight, wind, and water.
Mm-hmm.
What's the fuel cost for sunlight, wind, and water? 0.
That's got to be the future, and that's the real distressing. To me, that's one of the other things about this is we're putting all this money and political effort into things like tar sands and shale gas, when we could be putting all that money into actually the things you just listed.
Exactly, Kevin. That's the problem.
And you throw on top of that, not just the things you listed, but throw on top of that the most important and the most cherry-pickable item, which is efficiency.
Exactly.
Right. We have a hugely inefficient energy structure. So, it might be worthwhile if the cost-benefit, was there. But this is a hugely risky endeavor. And I think you talked about, we watched one of your talks, that out of every 150 wells, there's a significant environmental impact event. Can you talk about what those events are like and what risks they pose, and whether that's an acceptable risk level, if that's kind of standard?
2 questions there. So the data that are coming out of the states that show significant environmental harm being done is about what you just said. 1 out of every 100, 1 out of every 150 wells that's drilled will have a significant event. That means like the one you just described, the 84,000-gallon spill of frac fluid waste that occurred in Colorado recently, or a blowout, or a pipeline failure like the one that occurred in Michigan that put many thousands of gallons of oil into a pristine stream. These are events that are statistically predictable. The industry knows that even given the best practices and the best technology and the best training of their workers, that this is an inherently complex process taken to an extreme because they're trying to get an extreme form of energy produced. So the industry knows that 1 out of every 20 wells that it drills, in the very first year of operation of that well, will start to leak.
1 out of 20?
1 out of 20.
Wow.
That's the most recent data. And it maps the data that
we're talking about 20,000 new wells a year.
So you got 1,000 leaking wells. Some of them can be repaired, but they can only be repaired after they found to be leaking. And since they were leaking during the time that they were drilled to the time they were repaired, the damage is already done to somebody's local water supply.
And what they're leaking are these the water and
with the chemicals.
Could be leaking anything that's down there that was supposed to go down the well and up the well, but has somehow found a way to come up outside the well.
How many chemicals are involved in this fracking fluid?
In general, out of a list of 400 or 500 possibles that have been used throughout the years, a typical well nowadays uses 5 or 6 different kinds of chemicals, none of which you'd want to be in your trout stream, in your swimming pool, or in your drinking water. So typically you have a lubricant, you have an anti-corrosive, you have an anti-scaling additive, you have a pH balancer, and you have a biocide, something that kills bacteria.
So in addition to the methane and the climate impacts and all the trucks and all the trains and all the stuff being brought to this industrial site, you have the underground risks as well to the water supply. I've seen these videos. I don't know if they're true or not. I'm curious what you think. These videos of people turning their faucet on and fire coming out. Is that legitimate, or is that just kind of a YouTube fake?
It's not a YouTube fake.
Wow.
Depending upon where the person is, what their well history is, there have always been instances where methane has migrated into someone's private water well and allowed them to set fire to the methane coming out of their faucet.
Wow.
That's not the issue, whether it can happen or can't happen. The issue, being obscured by the industry, is how more frequently it's happening where it has never happened before.
Wow.
What's your thoughts about this guy that Obama's talking about for energy?
Ernest Moniz.
Ernest Moniz, energy secretary, who comes from MIT and is backed by the industry.
I have very serious concerns. I just got through saying this. I'll say it again if nobody heard it. The single most important environmental issue of our time is climate change.
Right.
And an impact on climate change that we currently are just in the beginning process of assessing is shale gas and shale oil development. And Dr. Moniz has been on record saying that he thinks that we should continue large-scale hydraulic fracturing for shale gas and shale oil because they're bridge fuels.
Yes.
That tells
But he has to know
that
that's
he
false.
doesn't have the same time frame in mind that I have.
But he has to know that's a false statement when he says something like that, doesn't he? He's not an idiot. I mean, he's got to know the truth of the situation.
One would hope.
I don't want to put words in his mouth.
Exactly.
I mean, it seems like it's so obvious. And has the EPA completed any kind of an environmental analysis of the impacts that are potential?
We're still in the early phases
Wow.
of major EPA studies. The EPA has had ongoing for about 2 years now a major study on the potential impact of hydraulic fracturing on drinking water. They've just now begun investigations of why, if we're labeling carbon dioxide as a contaminant, why aren't we labeling methane as a contaminant? If carbon dioxide has been approved by the Supreme Court of the United States as a greenhouse gas, why isn't the EPA regulating methane emissions as a greenhouse gas?
Yeah.
That's a really good
So again, that the current science will be proven wrong, or you complete the sentence.
Right.
I'm very
No.
concerned about his comments.
We have a pretty corrupt government.
Yeah. So we only have a few minutes.
No, we have less than a few minutes. Then we have to wrap it up.
Okay. Wow. Well, just very quickly, how does the risks, the known risks of fracking, compare to risks of other industries that that we allow? Is this an acceptable level of risk, do you think? Is it kind of standard, or what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's an acceptable level of risk. We have very tough regulations regarding just about everything that other industries do in the U.S., from driving across a bridge to flying in an airplane. And that level of federal regulation is totally absent from oil and gas production.
Oh.
We rely upon the 50 individual states to regulate things, and that results in a hodgepodge checkerboard of some good regulations in some states, where things are regulated than all in other states. So that increases the risk to the people. The people don't know whether they're living in Pennsylvania or West Virginia and Ohio in terms of risk. They only know that they're living in the United States. They're living in the world with respect to risk.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning and for all the work that you do. Is there a website that you recommend where people go to follow some of the work that you're doing?
www.psehealthyenergy.org. That's
Excellent.
P as in Peter, S as in Sam, E as in Eugene. psehealthyenergy.org.
Excellent. We'll share that on our website as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for shedding some light on this topic.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And for this break, we have a song by Tom Lehrer called Pollution. Pollution, pollution.
Pollution, pollution.
If you visit American City, you will find it very pretty. Just two things of which you must beware. Don't drink the water and don't breathe the air. Pollution, pollution, we got smog and sewage and mud. Turn on your tap and get hot and cold running crud.
You're listening to WPWC, We Act Radio, 1480 AM, weactradio.com.
I'm a third grade teacher.
I'm a school bus driver.
I am a parent.
I am a teacher's aide, and I agree to be identified
as a caring adult who pledges to help bullied students.
I will listen carefully to all students who seek my help
and act on their behalf
to put an immediate stop to bullying.
I will work with other caring adults to create a safe
learning environment for all the students in my school.
In my school.
In my school.
In my school.
I'm Dennis Van Rokel, president of the National Education Association. Help us create safe, bully-free learning environments for all students. One caring adult can make all the difference. Be that adult and take the pledge at NEA.org/bullyfree. Adults have the power to stop bullying in our schools.
It starts with me.
It starts with me.
It starts with me.
It starts with me.
Bully free. It starts with me.
Visit NEA.org/bullyfree. A message from the National Education Association.
This is Kimon Freeman, host of Speak Easy and co-founder of We Act Radio. Suicide is a very serious problem in today's challenging world, whether with our troops abroad or with everyday citizens within our own society. Before you take your life into your own hands, tie a knot at the end of your rope and call the suicide hotline toll free at 1-855-320-LIFE. That's 1-855-320-LIFE. It may just be the most important call you ever make. You talk, we listen, and together we survive.
It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
Pollution, pollution, you can use the latest toothpaste and then rinse your mouth with industrial waste.
You're listening to Clearing the Fog, Speaking Truth to Expose the Forces of Greed. That was Tom Lehrer.
Telling the truth. This is Kevin Zeese.
Song Pollution, that's
Margaret
right.
Flowers.
That's right. And we have our second guest today. We're very excited to have with us Sandra Steingraber. She's an internationally recognized biologist and author of several books, but most recently Raising Elijah. She founded New Yorkers Against Fracking and is a member of Concerned Health Professionals of New York. Good morning, Sandra.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Great.
So let's jump right in. You call fracking the single largest environmental threat to children's health. Can you tell us about that?
Fracking is an industry unlike any others. I mean, there's a lot of industries out there that depend on carcinogenic chemicals, and obviously, as somebody who spent 20 years looking at carcinogens, I think that any chemical that causes cancer should not be freely released into our air, food, and water, and that we should, redesign our economy so we don't depend on such chemicals. But drilling and fracking operations go another step, and that is that they're not zoned for their own. They're not set aside in another spot. They use our land as its factory floor, and compel us to live in an industrial zone that they create. At the same time, this industry is enjoys exemptions from many of our federal laws, the aspects of the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and including right to know laws, so that the old rules that we used to have, the old bad rules that said that toxic chemicals can be trade secrets, we threw that idea out in the 1980s and said, you know what, if it's toxic and it goes beyond the factory door and enters communities, then you have to tell us what it is. But that's not true for the gas industry. So I think as an emerging threat to pediatric environmental health, this is like nothing else I've seen.
Do you know that there are chemicals in the fracking fluid and that would actually be harmful to people?
We do know that. We don't have the right to know what the exact recipe is for the fracking fluid used at any one wellhead, and these are sort of custom-made cocktails that are specific for every unique geology. But we do have a kind of master list of all the potential ingredients. And Dr. Theo Colburn has done this work in Colorado. And so what we see when we look at the big list is that, more than a third of these chemicals that can potentially go down the hole are human carcinogens or suspected carcinogens, and an equally large chunk of them are neurological poisons, meaning that they can interfere with brain development in children. They're reproductive toxicants, meaning that they can interfere and sabotage pregnancy, or they're endocrine disruptors, meaning they can interfere with our hormones. But the actual, chemical ingredients in the fracking fluid, in my mind, is only a small part of the problem, because, in fact, the shale itself contains not only bubbles of methane, which is what the gas industry is going after, these petrified bubbles that are trapped down there in the bedrock that they have to blow apart in order to get the bubbles to come up. But as soon as you shatter the shale, you also release other chemicals that are trapped in the shale that are naturally occurring substances that, as long as they are held a mile below our feet in intact bedrock, don't hurt us. Right. But when you blow it apart and create these holes in the form of a mile-deep borehole that is the well, then they can come up. And we're talking about things like radon, which is the number 2 cause of lung cancer, talking about benzene, which is a known cause of children's leukemia, and so on. And so each one of these wells is like a chimney in the earth that vents toxic gases, and not just methane. And because it takes 1 to 2 months to drill a well like this, where you go down a mile and then you go sideways a mile, that's a long time to have an open hole that is venting into our air all kinds of volatile chemicals that are now allowed to escape. So really are kind of opening the lid on Pandora's box. In fact, we're shattering the lid. We're fracturing the lid on Pandora's box and allowing all these chemicals to be released, and that it concerns me gravely.
Right, and as a pediatrician, I agree with you. You wrote that children tend to, pound for pound, they have a greater exposure to these chemicals in the air and the water, and it has greater effects on them. Can you tell us how things are going in New York? What's going on right now in there? With
we're in a remarkable situation in New York, and as the founder of New Yorkers Against Fracking, I really am now wishing to bring a national spotlight on our situation, because I think it's actually very amazing. So we have a very well-organized anti-fracking movement, and that includes lots of physicians and scientists. I heard Tony Ingraffea's voice right before mine. He's one of our superstars, which has the best data on how cement well casings fail, not just as a result of accidents, but just as a result of their crumbling lifespan. And so we're putting together a very powerful public health message. So much so that we have now, like the Chinese guy standing in Tiananmen Square in front of the tanks, we have now succeeded in halting the forward motion toward fracking. As of February 12th, our governor announced that instead of releasing the draft regulations on fracking by this kind of manufactured deadline, he was going to be blowing that deadline in order that the Department of Health could have the time it needed to move forward with a health study, a health review of fracking. Now, I'm also a big critic of that review. It's being done in secret. We don't know how it's scoped, and the public has no input. And I think from a point of transparency and science, it's a contradiction in terms to do a secret public health study.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, I still think it's remarkable that for the first time that I know of, the oil and gas industry, the most powerful industry in the world, has been stopped in its tracks, however temporarily, by a head of state, our governor, who has said very bravely that we have to answer questions about the public health effects first. In other words, public health research is not just now the historian that goes in after the fact to document all the harm, as we did with tobacco and lead paint and asbestos, but rather we're going to try to study this and as best we can forecast what the harm is before we allow this industry to move forward and to determine a decision on whether it should move forward or not.
It actually looked like it was going the other way in New York. Cuomo seemed to be really pushing hard to get this done.
And I'm sure he still is.
Pushing regulations before doing the environmental and health reports. And I'm really pleased. It took a major grassroots effort to slow that down.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I've never worked so hard on anything in my life. A lot of us are still sleeping on every other night.
Well, you're having a good impact.
But we're having a good impact, and I think what we can do now is support the governor in his decision to hit the brakes, and we certainly have in our own health commissioner, who is now looking closely at other ongoing research on fracking from our other states where fracking is ongoing. We can show our governor the path. We can illuminate the path for him, and clearly he has already seen seawater sloshing around in the subway tubes of Manhattan. He has said he wants to be a leader on climate change. And so toxic substances and children's development aside, the World Health Organization has already declared that climate change is the number one health threat to children worldwide. If the governor wants to lead on climate change, he needs to close the door to what I said in my own op-ed this weekend in the Albany Times-Union. He needs to close the door on the methane-breathing dragon that is fracking, and show the world how New York can invest in clean energy and green jobs.
It's time to set a goal of a carbon-free, nuclear-free energy economy in New York, and that would be the kind of thing that would propel him. He wants to be president. That's pretty much an open secret, and he has to balance the science and the people's concerns that you're showing with his Wall Street funders and the oil and gas.
That was going to be my next question, because he's up against a very difficult foe. I mean, one that has tremendous resources and tremendous what do I want to say, that they've infiltrated so many groups. I mean, we look at the oil and gas industry's effect on the Susan G. Komen Foundation and their kind of reticence to call out some of these chemicals as carcinogens. But are there any good health studies that are being done that we know are being done by groups that are not affected by the oil and gas industry, or that are being done openly? Are we getting some good information out there?
We are. Of course, science, moves slowly, right? And so the problem is that the oil and gas industry was given a green light to simply frack us and roll this industry out before the science could get done. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, there are emerging studies, and there is now a brand new special issue on the health effects of fracking in the current issue of New Solutions, which is about to be released. I've seen some of it in Uncorrected Galleys. So this is the first time now that we have a peer-reviewed journal in the field of public health where we're focusing on what we know. And so what I can tell you, just as a kind of sneak preview of what that is going to show, is that we have case studies from Pennsylvania showing that people are getting sick in areas of drilling and fracking. We have evidence from livestock and pets, and I know some of studies that are in the pipeline now that are demonstrating that different pregnancy outcomes among women whose residencies are near drilling and fracking operations. In other words, lower birth weights and lower APGAR scores, which is, as you know, a measure of infant responsiveness at birth.
Not good news.
So the question is, all right, so those studies are in the pipeline. Of course, it takes a while to go through the peer review process.
Right.
Do you really want to wait? Do you really want to unroll this before we can actually publish the data?
Yeah.
Or do you want to wait? And that's what we're telling the governor. And we hope that he correctly sees that a few years of pollution-dependent prosperity by treating our bedrock like a piñata and cashing it out and leaving a mess for future generations is actually going to be a bad
trade-off.
Bad political option.
Bad trade-off.
Yeah, we have to take a quick break. We'd love to get into this more in depth after the break, and for this we're going into with a song that you may know, Sandra. It's called My Water's on Fire Tonight by Studio 20 NYU.
Fracking is a form of natural gas drilling, an alternative to oil, because the oil kept spilling, bringing jobs to small towns, so everybody's willing. People turn on the lights and the drillers make a killing.
Water goes into the pipe into the ground. The pressure cranes fishes 7,000 feet down. The cracks release the gas that powers your town. That well's fracked, yeah, totally fracked.
But there's more in the water than just H2O. Toxic chemicals help to make the fluid flow. With names like benzene and formaldehyde, you better keep them far away from the water supply.
The drillers say the fishes are a mile below. The groundwater pumped into American homes, but don't tell it to the residents of Subway, that water's fracked. We're talking benzene.
You're listening to WPWC We Act Radio, 1480 AM, weactradio.com.
Smith, Jane Smith, your prescription's ready for pickup at the pharmacy counter.
Thanks, that was fast. How much do I owe?
There's no charge. This is covered without a copay now.
Thanks to President Obama, the 99% of women who use birth control in America could now hear this same message. You see, we scored an important victory when the president stood up for our health care and guaranteed insurance coverage of birth control at no cost. He's making sure women of all faiths, no matter where they work, can get contraceptive coverage. But extremists in Congress are trying to change the policy by making it harder for women to get birth control with no copay. Call Congress at 202-225-3121 and tell them to stand with President Obama, not between a woman and her birth control.
Paid for by NARAL Pro-Choice America.
Hey, it's your boy Richard Fowler. When I took this journey to start the Richard Fowler Show, I understand that it was bigger than me. It's bigger than all of us, you see. The only way we can truly create change in this country and to the world is by informing ourselves, empowering ourselves, and understanding how important our voices are to the power structure in this country. That's why we did it. That's why we created the Richard Fowler Show. This is our time. This is our opportunity. And most importantly, this is our movement. So join us every Friday night from 8 to 10 when we tackle the big questions of the day, when we talk about the real issues, when we get rid of the talking points, the talking heads, and the smoking guns, and we talk about how these issues really affect you. We can't wait for you to join our movement every Friday nights from 8 to 10, only on We Act Radio.
Hi, I'm Patrick Ewing. I'm here giving something back to the community. I went to school here. I lived here in the community. You know, I have an office here on Minnesota Avenue. I always loved D.C., you know, just trying to give something back to the community of Ward 8 in this community or from around the country. We Act Radio, do something.
You're listening to Clearing the Fog, speaking truth to expose the forces of greed with Margaret Flowers.
And Kevin Zeese, we're trying to find out what the frack is
going on. And joining us right now is Sandra Steingraber. She's a biologist and author of Raising Elijah. We were talking about some of the health effects associated with fracking and the fact that these studies are just starting to come out. And so the fracking has already begun before we even know whether it's safe or not.
I hope these studies are being leaked to the Department of Health in New York so they can include them in their health review. You know?
Yeah.
Boy.
So, Sandra, if we could in this next section just move towards what we need to do. You write a lot about parents like I did, raising my 3 children, trying to find safe foods and areas for them. But you say that's not enough if we live in a toxic world. So what do you see as the next that we should be doing as parents?
Well, that was my starting point in Raising Elijah, to write as a biologist mother about what parents should be doing, right? Because it really is our job basically parenting, I think, everything about parenting falls into one of 2 categories. You have to keep your child safe from harm and plan for their future. And as somebody who looks at pediatric toxicology, I know that I can't put my body between my children's bodies and the more than 200 different brain poisons that are allowed to freely circulate in our economy, right? So as I say in the book, I'm a conscientious parent, but I'm not a HEPA filter.
Right.
And so to do that, we have to actually engage in really vigorous chemical reform efforts. And then, of course, planning for a future of our children means they need to have an oxygen supply, right? Half of the oxygen is provided by the plankton in the oceans, and those plankton are in trouble now because of climate change and so on. And so how can I plan for my child's future if the ecology on which my child depends and the climate itself is now in trouble? Right. So suddenly these big global issues become issues of parenting. Right. So in Raising Elijah, I talk about how the environmental crisis is really a threat to family life, and of course, when we parents of young children we have the least amount of time of anybody out there. And so how can we deal with this? And so I hope the book, provides some ideas. And essentially, I'm not interested anymore in trying to help people create a toxic-free home. I mean, I think that is like trying to create a beautifully appointed nuclear bomb shelter.
That's right. We really need much more systemic change.
Right. We need to disarm. Right. We don't need beautiful bomb shelters.
Right.
And so... So taking a lesson, I think, from the nuclear disarmament movement and from the abolition movement, so I'm trying to draw from very powerful human rights movements in the past that have been successful and say, how can we, what is the analog right now to disarmament? It really means coming up with a carbon-free future. And I really have come to believe that.
Now, let me ask you something before, because you say carbon-free. I always say carbon-free, nuclear-free. Do you agree with the nuclear?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I always make it carbon-free, nuclear-free. I think that's too many people.
Actually, I think in a way it's redundant in a sense because you can't do nuclear without a carbon intensive. It's a very carbon intensive process to even get
That's right, it is.
uranium refined. So
a lot of people advocate for a nuclear solution to this.
Thinking it's cleaner.
Our last energy secretary, our last energy secretary came from academia, funded by nuclear power. Now we have another one that Obama's told me that comes from the gas industry. It's
nuclear industry.
They're putting these people in who believe nuclear and gas, this all of the above nonsense that I think is totally off base.
I agree, and so maybe I should put a finer point by always saying nuclear-free as well. To my mind, carbon-free contains the idea of nuclear-free.
Good.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you see us moving in that direction?
Well, it's going to take an abolition movement, and it's going to take, and combined with the kind of Helen Caldicott-style anti-nuclear movement as well, and a real forceful insertion of people in the political process. And so I'm really interested now in going to the source of the problem, which I used to think in the 20 years I dealt with toxic chemical reform, involved the point at which chemicals are manufactured, and we really wanted the bad actors banned. And now I've come to believe that actually those chemicals are going to be manufactured as long as we're blasting carbon out of the ground. So, for example, I live in a beautiful wine-growing area of New York, the Finger Lakes area, and 20 miles from my house, depleted salt caverns are being repurposed for the storage of butane, methane, and propane from the fracking fields of Pennsylvania. Those are going to be turned into the building blocks for pesticides, plastics, anhydrous ammonia, and other petrochemicals. So when you blast methane out of the ground so that we can light it on fire to keep our tea kettles whistling and our houses warm, then you also have all these other hydrocarbons that are could be a waste product, or the energy industry could make money selling it to the chemical industry, making more stuff that we absolutely don't need, like plastic shower curtains and anhydrous ammonia, thereby undermining our attempts to do sustainable agriculture and green building, right? And so the point of action, the real upstream approach to all of this is to change our energy policy. And in changing our energy policy, we will also change our chemical policy.
That's why I mentioned the idea of your governor, Cuomo, putting forward a carbon-free, nuclear-free New York. When FDR, but when he was governor of New York before he became president, he put forward a lot of New Deal programs as governor, including retirement programs for the people. And I think there's a lot of lessons in that you
I think that's smart. I actually hadn't thought of that, but I'd like to remind our governor of that history.
And the other thing I'd point out, I think that's important. You mentioned people getting politically active. We've done a lot of shows on democracy. It's very difficult in this country to have a real democracy. We've done article in Truth about the managed democracy we live in, where you're giving two choices, both supported by Wall Street. It reminds me of the abolition movement. You had a situation when you had two parties that were either slave plantation owners or people who profited from slaves, the Whigs and the Democrats who kept slavery off the table. These two parties are not going to put a new energy economy on the table. That's not going to happen for these two parties. We need to really follow the abolition movement and start to say this political system systemically is corrupt. Obama is the best you can hope for from the Democrats, and it's not good enough. And so he's putting forward energy secretaries who reinforce the nuclear, fracking, tar sands, all the above, offshore drilling nonsense that's putting us all at risk.
Well, I think there's a role for a really powerful grassroots movement, and I think we're seeing that. I mean, in New York now we have more than 6,000 people who have signed a pledge to resist fracking in New York, which is
that's great. Resistance
again
is key.
based on a pledge that was earlier used in the Reagan administration for Central American solidarity work. And this pledge says that should the governor approve fracking, that we are at a moment's notice ready to engage in acts of peaceful, nonviolent
the Underground Railroad, the Underground Railroad of energy.
Well, so that's one part of it. But I think I'm also a biologist. I'm a signer of this pledge, so I'm ready to commit civil disobedience itself because I'm a parent and a human being, and it's my job to protect my children from harm.
Right, we've done the same.
And we'll do that. But I'm also a biologist, and I also believe that science plays a role in policy, and in fact the science is on our side. The science shows us that we could, within 20 years, entirely get off of fossil fuels, run our economy entirely on renewables, if we can bring our energy consumption down by half, and we have good science showing how we could do that and put people to work at the same time. So I think there's, it's a carrot and a stick, right? And so there's the sort of threat of direct action, and we have people who are the governor's constituents. 204,000 people, record-breaking number, sent in comments announcing the last draft regulations. Right. Well, that's a huge number. I mean, that would, even in a big state like New York, that's 204,000 is enough to throw an election.
Absolutely.
So we're reminding the governor of that. At the same time, we want to say, just hit the pause button long enough to let the science get done, and we will give you your reasons for being a champion for green energy. That's the future. Right. You don't need to stick with this bad, ruinous past. In a few years' time, I think building an economy in New York based on fracking will be like building an economy in New York based on tobacco smoking. Or something. You know, I mean,
That's a really good
there
way
was
to put
a
it.
time when that would have seemed perfectly reasonable.
That's
it doesn't
right.
seem reasonable anymore.
Right.
And one of the things I'd like to remind my own kids is that change is possible, right? Like when I was 5 years old, I'm 53 now, when I was 5 years old, I went to kindergarten. The very first art project we made was we made ashtrays. All these 5-year-olds were put to work making
I remember doing that too.
I did too. Yeah, I did too.
And nobody even smoked in my house, but it was just like, went without saying that every house needed an ashtray, and that kids are really good at making them. Well, that's crazy, right? And we see it's crazy now, but it wasn't crazy in 1964. Smoking was at a high point. But I think fracking will seem crazy in the future to people.
And I think it's very important you focus on resistance, because the price of gasoline is dropping. The profit margin on these fracking sites is going to be dropping, and resistance will slow that and make it more expensive. So I think that those combination of science and resistance and people participating in the process, pushing the governor and also threatening the governor, because remember, the abolition, it took a third-party president, Abraham Lincoln, to end slavery. Neither of the two existing parties would do it. And so we just have to, all fronts need to be attacked.
Right. I think it's really important what you bring up is that there is a solution, because I think people don't hear that enough.
That's
we could move to a carbon-free, nuclear-free energy economy very quickly. So we only have a minute left. Can you tell our listeners how they can follow you, find out how to get involved? What would you recommend?
Sure. And so I'm the founder of an organization called New Yorkers Against Fracking. And so you can just Google that and find us. And then New Yorkers Against Fracking is also a proud founder itself of Americans Against Fracking, which is an attempt to kind of replicate what we've achieved, but specific to other states, because since the federal government refuses to regulate fracking, it's regulated in
the state level,
on the state level, and so every state's kind of in a different place with it.
Right.
But we are trying to be a really strong and national voice. So New Yorkers Against Fracking and Americans Against Fracking. And New Yorkers Against Fracking was begun. This coalition of mine was begun when I decided to take the money I received as a lucky recipient of a Heinz Award in 2011 for my research on environmental health, and instead of using that money to sort of support my own research, I decided to try to not just study fracking, but to stop it, right? And so really people are often saying that, oh, you made this big sort of like charitable donation. No, it's actually in my self-interest. I mean, I see this as the best investment I could make to stop fracking in my kids' own backyard.
We'll put links to those websites on our website.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a tremendous show, and we're going to go out with our favorite band, Junkyard Empire, and their song...
You're listening to WPWC, We Act Radio, 1480 AM, weactradio.com.
Good point. In Yenhamsville, Michigan. Payphone users call 954-99-00036. And for the National Security Administration, FAN.
I'll say it again. Nigger, nigger, nigger.
But even within the world of derogatory...
female workers. And with 2 children, they come